What's up, guys? This is Eddie T, aka Slumpfish. Today we're going to be playing around with the Digitone. We're going to try to get some 303 acid sounds out of it. In the past, I've struggled a bit with getting that slippery, squelchy acid sound to come out of the Digitone, at least to my personal satisfaction. But since then, I've done a lot of trial and error, and I've done a little bit studying up on what's going on inside the 303 that kind of gives it that characteristic acid, slippery, squelchy sound. But for now, let's get into how we're going to go about it. And hopefully by the end, we can have a better understanding of what it is that makes the 303 do what it does and what it is about the Digitone that's special that it can bring to that equation. So if we're going to be making some 303 bass, we need a 303 pattern. Best way to do this is to go into step record mode. You do that by holding down record and then stop. Now we got this little green guy flashing. Hold down function. So let's punch in some kind of fun little pattern. Let's go ahead and take some of these notes and jump them up an octave. All right, that's a pattern. One thing that's incredibly important is we got to make sure all this note information, that none of it has any velocity information attached to it. If you are to play this pattern out live, just over the groove, it's going to save it as like 100 velocity by default. And it's also going to save the length that you held it down. But we got to make sure that the length is always less than a 16th. Because when we go to setup, portamento, we have type here. We're going to turn that all the way over to legato only. This is going to make it so that if we want there to be a slide between notes, that will only occur when two notes are overlapping. So since these are all less than a 16th note, right now none of these notes touch each other, but we can say make this one a little longer. Now it's going to touch this note, it's going to move into that note. Real quick, when I was doing this earlier, I realized that I forgot to mention kind of the most important part, and that is you have to actually turn portamento on. So I didn't do that until way later in the process, so just ignore the fact that it's not actually on and just go with it. It's going to be fine. So that's how we get a slide, but how do we get an accent? So we need to go to setup, velocity to volume. We need to go all the way to the left, turn it off. Now we're going to go to velocity here, turn all the notes down to 0. That sounds kind of weird, right? Why would we do that? Well, because we're going to go into setup. We're going to go to this beautiful page called velocity mod. In this page, we're going to be telling it to jump to these values that we assign for 4 different parameters. We're going to use it like an on-off switch. So this represents velocity levels. When this is at 127, it's going to jump to those levels. But because all our notes are at 0 velocity, it's basically a binary option now. It's going to go from on to off. Because anytime we want an accent, we're just going to turn this up to 127. So let's set that up real quick. So the 4 parameters we have set up are filter resonance. We want the resonance to be a little more intense when we hit the accent amp drive. This is because we turn velocity to volume off. We want our accents to be a little louder than the other notes, so we're going to use the drive setting to do that. Filter frequency, we want it to just jump a little bit. And filter attack. This is exaggerating the motion of the filter attack so that the attack becomes slower as it moves up and then comes back down. So now that we have velocity set up to be pushing certain parameters, let's pick notes to give accents to. This one, this one. Let's try it. Okay, once we fill in all the rest of the details, it's going to sound a lot better. So for send page 1, we want algorithm 8 because it isolates the B operator to the Y axis, essentially making it a single oscillator that we can use to emulate the classic pulse wave and saw wave from the 303. Of course, our mix has to be all the way over to the Y for this to work, since that's where it's been isolated. For ratio, we're leaving it at 1. We're going to make our wave shape somewhat close to a square, so that's somewhere around 18, between 18 and 19. And I have a little bit of feedback dialed in. That's just to give it a little bit of attitude, a little bit of bite. On the amp page, these are pretty basic, but the main takeaway is short release, fast attack. Also, if you want to add some distortion, I personally didn't think it needed it. But if you do, make sure you leave some room, because when we hit our accents, it's got to have some room to jump up. So just keep that in mind. Here's a couple things we can do that I think make the Digitone sound a little less unforgivingly digital. First, we turn off phase reset. It's always set to all. Now it's off. Like most analog synths, the 303 does not reset the phase of the waveform every time you trigger a note, so we don't want that. Next up, we have filter page 2. The bass is set to 31. You might be wondering, why are we cutting low end? Well, this is because when you push the resonance on a 303, you get less bass. That's a common thing with analog synths. This is just a somewhat crude way of doing that. And finally, on LFO1, we're using a triangle shape at a very low speed in free run mode. It's a very subtle movement of the pitch up and down at a slow rate, and it's meant to kind of imitate that natural drift that an analog oscillator can have. So one of the main problems that happens when you're trying to make acid on a Digitone is that if you try to switch the pattern, it's going to interrupt the flow of what you're doing. Say you're writing the filter envelope up and down. Once you change pattern, it's going to ignore what you were doing and just jump to the value of whatever that pattern was saved at. And that's actually a really cool and kind of crucial element of the architecture of the Digitone. But of course, in the context where we want to be able to just ride the filter up and down the whole song, that's not going to work for us. And that's kind of essential for acid. So luckily, we have something that we can do to work around that, and that's called macro controls. With these macro controls, what it's going to do is allow us to rise the filter cutoff while also pushing the envelope, while also pushing the resonance, while also decreasing the decay of that filter envelope. Technically, you might not want to be pushing all three of those at once. This is kind of the compromise that we have to work with inside the workflow of the Digitone. As you probably heard in these examples, it gets the job done. For our filter, we're going to turn the frequency down to around 46. You might be wondering, that's really low. And that's because once we get the macros set up, we'll be using that to control and push the levels. So what we're really setting up here is the lowest we want our filter and our envelope and everything to go down. This is like the bottom of that range. So go to Function, Setup. Now you see all these options: Aftertouch, Breath Controller, Modulation Wheel, and our friend Velocity Mod. Well, let's go to Modulation Wheel. The first thing we need to do is push the level of this all the way up. This is our master control. This is the knob that we're going to be moving all of our parameters up and down with. Now we're going to choose Filter Frequency. Notice how, as I push this amount up, the filter frequency cutoff gets higher. So now, this is essentially tying this value to this amount. So I can bring this down, and it does the same thing. You might be wondering, why is that helpful? Well, it's because we can link it to these other parameters. So for filter frequency, we're going to put it around 55. Next up, we're going to do filter resonance. That's going to go up to 39, 40, somewhere around there. For filter decay, we're going to do a negative number, around 2. For our last one, we're going to do filter envelope. Now, as you know, it was set pretty low over here, but there's a little bit activated. That is accurate to how the 303 operates. Even with the envelope depth at 0, there's still a little bit of envelope applied. And we're going to pump this up to around 9. What are the things we need to make an acid bassline sound the way we want it to sound? It seems fairly straightforward, right? We need to have a filter envelope, we need to have spiked resonance, and we need to ride the filter up and down and ride those other 2 parameters up and down as well. Pretty much any synth can probably do that, but why is it that we can't sound like the 303 when we do it? One of the key ingredients, one of the things that kind of unlocked it a bit for me, is that when you crank the envelope, the decay for that envelope gets shorter. And it's subtle, but once you apply that, you'll hear it. It sounds a little more correct. So let's see how that sounds. Hell yeah. One real quick note. The 303 filter does not open up nearly as far as the Digitone's does. So it's really easy to push it too far and kind of lose the plot as far as getting that squirty, slippery, acid sound. In the same way, you also don't want to push the envelope too far because then it's going to push this out of the range of what you want. So keep that in mind. Also, these values are very negotiable. Please feel free to mess with these, but try to do it with this at full. Because if you start doing it with it right here or right here, you're going to get lost. It's good to know your limits and your outer boundaries and to find what sounds good in between them, if that makes sense. Yes. Hell yeah. All right, that's our pattern. I went ahead and added a couple rhythmic elements to it to kind of give it more of a context within a song. And we also compared it directly with the TD3, which I found kind of an interesting practice. The Digitone has more bass, it's more clean, the attack is different, but it's not really wrong per se, or at least to my ears it's not. The TD3 has this ineffable quality to it. When you push that resonance, it has this chirpy, plucky, just kind of beautiful drive that comes through that's kind of a fool's errand to try to replicate exactly. The TD3 is basically one giant sweet spot. And that sweet spot is so big, it created an entire subgenre of music. Whereas the Digitone, it's just all about flexibility. It's all about how surgical you can get and how much experimentation can just lead you in directions you never thought you'd go. This pattern we set up today is really just a starting point. And I would very much encourage you to take what this is and run in every direction at once and just see what you can find. Because when you combine the power of the sequencer of the Digitone, man, we can open a lot of doors. And we can do things that might not sound like the traditional acid sound, but could still nail that vibe. That's all I gotta say. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please like and subscribe. If you want to download the project files that I used for all the songs you heard today on this video, they're going to be available through my Patreon, which you can join, and the link will be down below. I hope y'all enjoyed this video. I hope y'all had some fun, and I hope y'all maybe felt a little bit inspired, because I can't tell you how many times I've put on a video of somebody just having fun with their gear, and I walk away just ready to play, ready to make something. And this channel is kind of my way of hopefully trying to give that back. Thanks for watching. I love you guys. Eddie T, Slumpfish here. Goodbye.